We're going to start with Tyler Boyd going to the Tennessee Titans. The Steelers were reportedly in on this guy to some degree for some of the offseason. Then that interest faded. There was rumors out there that he got a deal for 2 years, $10 million from the Steelers. Well, he signs a 1 year, $4.5 million deal with the Tennessee Titans instead. So you got to feel that 2 year, $10 million deal was not on the table for Tyler Boyd. He's gone. The market has seemingly evaporated to nothing. Zay Jones is probably the only other option that would come in here and be feasible as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, depending on where you see Roman Wilson. Then there's the trade market. I mean, I got to ask, Tyler Boyd leaves. The options are very limited. Do you still see the Steelers as a team that are looking to add a wide receiver before training camp, before OTAs, before minicamp?
I mean, I don't know if it was just the options were too limited or the deals weren't good enough, but it doesn't seem like the Steelers are intent on adding another wide receiver. It just hasn't been reflected in the moves that they've made, the aggressiveness that they've shown in going after some big name guys. I mean, I still think that it didn't need to be a star that they need to get. I thought you just needed kind of a wide receiver too, someone who could play off of George Pickens and kind of fit in as a good run blocker in this offense that's going to run the ball a lot. But man, they just don't seem to be aggressive or intent on going after anyone who could really make that much of an impact at all. What it tells me is that they really believe in Roman Wilson. I mean, I kept seeing, a couple headlines the other day, like, oh, maybe we're putting too much on Roman Wilson's plate, a 3rd-round rookie. But, I mean, the expectations are going to be artificially high because I look at this roster right now and he looks like the second best receiver on the team, at least in terms of talent. So, you're leaning on a really young guy. You're leaning on a really unproven group of receivers, but the Steelers seem very, very comfortable with that. And maybe some surprise trade comes, maybe something that we're not expecting to come happens. But the Steelers seem extremely content with a wide receiver group that, I'll be honest with, it doesn't look very threatening to me at all.
Yeah, I have kind of come to grips that if there's going to be a move, it's going to be a trade, and it's going to be later in the season or later in the summer. But I don't really think that that's like, I think it had all the hype. I think everything that we heard about the situation was real, that the Pittsburgh Steelers were very interested in names like Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel and Cortland Sutton, and they wanted to pursue one of them, and they wanted to make sure that a move could happen. And then they hit a point where they said, okay, this is way too expensive. This is getting crazy. Why we're not going to make a dumb move for a position that is not a dire need on this team, even if we thought it was a pretty big need. You could still make moves with Roman Wilson and George Pickens and so on and so forth and try to kind of fit the bill. And yesterday I said it, and I kind of feel like I should double down on it, that I think George Pickens could be your number 1 by the end of the season and be a superstar enough where you feel good about it. And I think the Steelers believe that to the point where they're not going to make a dumb move. They're not just going to go out and sign anybody because they have the money to do so and they have the restructures to do so and they have the draft capital to do so. I think if it doesn't make sense, which nothing seems to have made sense yet, they're going to let it rock with who they have, with George Pickens, with Roman Wilson, with Calvin Austin and Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson and Cordero Patterson and Pat Freiermuth and Connor Hayward, and they're just going to make the most out of it. I think that's the direction that they're headed in, and it's worked out in the past. I think that's the other part of this, is that I heard Albert Breer say yesterday on the Pat McAfee show that the last time the Steelers brought in an outside wide receiver who led the team in receiving yards was during World War II. That's how long ago it was. That's a crazy stat. This team has been homegrown wide receivers forever. They make the most out of guys, which is why I still think that you can make the most out of guys like Calvin Austin and then turn Roman Wilson into something big relatively quickly. I mean, you got to remember that, like, back in the day, Antonio Brown was the number 1, and Juju Smith-Schuster comes in here and he makes an immediate impact as a 2nd-round pick. So I think Roman Wilson could have that type of impact in his rookie season, and then all you got to do is bank on George Pickens kind of being that superstar.
Yeah, I completely agree on Pickens, and I'm on the record saying that I'm really high on Roman Wilson. I think he can be a reliable number 2. It's just It's risky, and I don't think you look at this wide receiver core and I don't know. The Steelers are going to look exactly the same as we kind of expected them to. Like, they are still, you're just doubling down on, man, we better be able to run the football. Like, if they can't run the football, then this is all for naught, because, I mean, these receivers, again, like, I wouldn't say unreliable. We need to see them on the field, but you look at the rest of the NFC North or the AFC North, especially. You look at the rest of the AFC. The Steelers are kind of going the opposite direction as a lot of different other teams
Yeah.
when the rest of the AFC is investing in their quarterbacks and their passing game and everything like that. The Steelers are kind of saying, "Hey, we're going back to traditional football. We're running the football. We're ground and pound, and when we need to, we'll take a shot downfield."
Yep.
It's a lot on George Pickens though. Like you said, I think he can be a superstar. I think he's got that potential. He's got to he's going to have to grow up fast, and I don't think the Steelers though would have gone about their offseason in this way if they didn't believe that, if they didn't believe that George Pickens was ready to a certain extent carry a passing offense,
Yeah. I look at I agree, and I'm pulling them up right now. Like I think people gotta to some degree remember that, being away from football, as long as we've been away from football, we start to it's tough to get a grip. You start to theorize on pretty much everything because you haven't watched actual football in a while. And there are like true-blooded superstars of, okay, that's awesome. I think that at times we have to take a moment to remember what George Pickens did when he was the number one in Pittsburgh. Like when he had an offense to himself. I mean, he has 3, 4, 5 massive games last season. Those massive games are 127 yards and a touchdown, 130 yards and a touchdown, 107 yards, 195 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then 131 yards. Like, when given an opportunity, George Pickens has made the most out of it, and I think that's why, like, I think everybody, ourselves included, have kind of like swarmed to the media outlook of George Pickens is like a really good number 2, and have somewhat forgot that like George Pickens has the potential to be one of the best number 1s in football, and you have to get to that potential. And I agree with you, like they're going against the grain and they're putting a lot on his shoulders. But I think that if you ask George, like, hey, do you want it on your shoulders? I think he'd smile and laugh and give you some, like, yes. Like, why would I not want it on my shoulders? I think he's had it on his shoulders his whole career. And I think this is an opportunity to be that guy. So I think that given the shot, I expect George to come out here and really like it take no time to be like, okay, guys, remember me? Like, I'm one of the best young receivers in the NFL. And I think everybody should remember that. And with Arthur Smith running the show and a good quarterback who's, I mean, like that was his biggest things last year. Matt Canada knew how to run one route with George Pickens, and it was straight. Once in a while, he told him to run across the field, but that's it. And Kenny Pickett threw a football about 2.5 seconds after somebody was open. So you're not really working with timing there. You get Russell Wilson in here who could probably utilize his expectations or his reaction time a little bit better, and you get an offensive coordinator that actually knows how to work an offense. I just think things could happen when it comes to George. And then Roman, I think Roman's more of the question mark. Like I think that's where it comes down to is like, what's the fall off? How big of a cliff are you jumping off after George Pickens? But I think the Steelers are going to be okay with taking a risk if they don't. Do you still see them as like an AFC, I don't want to say powerhouse, but have the potential to be a contender even if they don't get a wide receiver?
I do. I think it does limit their ceiling a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, will you be able to compete with the Chiefs? I'm not super sure about that at this point. I think, my prediction that they could, make an AFC Championship game, hang in that kind of game, was kind of contingent on them adding another piece at wide receiver. I think they can still get to an AFC Championship game, but I think this path is much more narrow without, a true-blooded number 2. If you're counting on Roman Wilson to get there, that's fine. That makes sense. Same with George Pickens being a superstar, but it's a narrower path, You don't have as many other options. You don't get to be as multiple on offense. And so it's going to get not necessarily harder, but you just have to be very good at the things that you've declared that you will be very good at. So not impossible. I just think if one thing goes wrong, if Roman Wilson isn't the guy, if George Pickens ends up not being able to reach that ceiling, then you're in a whole lot of trouble because there's not someone else that you can lean on. There's not a different way that you can win on offense.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I do think you limit yourself. I do think you've put yourself in a position where one thing goes wrong things are really, really in a tight spot. But I think that moves could be made if that happens. But I agree with you. I think that the road is more narrow and the risk is definitely much higher without adding that other guy that could be whoever you need him to be in that situation, because you don't want to bank on a third round rookie to come in here and be like, all right, you are now the number one. Have fun. We got to win games. Like that's not a spot that you want to be in. I agree.